Best-selling author Dhonielle Clayton is making the literary world more diverse. Last year, her novel, The Marvelers, the first in her Conjureverse series, spent 10 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. Now she's releasing the second book in her series, The Memory Thieves. It follows Ella, a young girl who is the first in her community to attend an international magic school. Dhonielle, thank you so much for being here. This is the book, and the cover alone, I'm gonna let them get a little close-up here,
right,
gave me the warm and fuzzies, because we're starting to see more and more kids of color on the covers of, young children's books. But to see this black girl with braids on the cover as the protagonist, just, it filled me in a way. It kind of surprised me that I was, had this reaction.
Mm-hmm.
You've said that you wrote this book to your younger self. Tell us about that.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. But I wanted to really sort of make a love letter to my young reader self. I was a bookworm, but I never got to see people who look like me, people who look like my family.
Oh, look at the photos.
Right? And I feel like it stunted my imagination. I didn't become a writer until much later in life. And I thought maybe if I could see myself, I could write myself into magical universes. So I wanted to make sure the next generation of readers didn't have that issue.
So talk to us about the emphasis on diversity, how diverse the book is, the research it took to make it that way.
Absolutely. Well, it takes place in a magic school in the sky that travels all over the world that every kid can have an invitation to. And so I wanted to make sure that my students, I used to be a teacher and librarian in East Harlem, New York, that they could see themselves, their families, and their communities reflected. And so my students came from all over the world. That's New York. That's New York City.
That's right.
And there wasn't a magic school that had an invitation for them, that had a place for them. And I wanted to make sure that they were asking me for these kinds of books, that they could go to a school like this, and there would be space for them. And I grew up in a family full of travelers, a military family, and so I was traveling early. So I was very lucky to be able to meet people from all over the world, and I wanted to reflect that in the world of the Conjureverse and Marvelers.
So, as we've pointed out, you include in your books stories. You don't stay away from discrimination, you don't stay away from prejudice and racism, but have seen across the country there have been movements to ban books. That's happened in a number of states. How do you feel when you see a book that you've written to help children? Adults say to you, hey, we don't want to expose our children to this kind of literature?
It's frustrating. It's upsetting. It's erasure. It's censure. It's like you don't want people that look like me or look like my students to exist and to be in environments and fictional environments that are exciting. But we also have to be able to tell the truth. And book banning is suppressing the truth. And because it wants to create one narrative. And this book gets into that, but through the lens of fantasy, which is a great metaphor to discuss real world topics that adults don't really want to talk about. Well, it's fantasy. So is it real or is it not real? So I like to use that as a vehicle. And I always ask adults sort of, what are you afraid of? It's time for us to talk about real stuff. The young people already know. They see it.
So you purposely tried to draw that parallel between one of the major storylines, which is keeping secrets and lying about history, rewriting history. That was something you purposely did in this book.
Absolutely. And it came out of a conversation I was having with my parents about how they integrated schools in the South. My dad's from Mississippi, my mom's from North Carolina, and how it was a fractured conversation. And there were so many lies told about it. And I wanted to talk about that, but use a magical analog metaphor to be able to really talk about it so we can say, well, is it real or is it not real? And so I did all of that on purpose because young people are seeing censorship. They're seeing the bans. They're seeing that adults don't want to have real conversations.
Right.
But if we use fantasy, it's a way to have a real conversation.
It's a vehicle to get there.
Well, because Dhonielle, one of the things that I'm fascinated by is I look at that picture of you as a little girl and I wondered to myself, I wasn't into fantasy books as a young man. I read tons, but I didn't see myself represented in that world, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, those types of books. And so what would that little girl have thought if she pulled up a book like The Memory Thieves, like your younger self?
She would have been obsessed. I would have read this book probably 100 times. It would have been falling apart. I would have been annoying my mother about, I need a new copy. And that was the issue, is that I felt like young people, especially people of color, weren't being fed. And it means that we don't become writers. We don't know that we can write. We don't know that this is a career path.
Right.
And so I wanted to provide that yes, you can use your imagination. I have this conversation with like a lot of friends. One of my good friends, Jason Reynolds, he said that he felt like when he was a young person that his imagination was taken from him. So he didn't read fantasy either.
Well,
So
now so many
there's
young
this.
people and adults are going to be reading this fantasy. Thank you so
That's
much,
right.
Dhonielle.
for
The
having
Memory
me.
Thieves is available on Tuesday, wherever you like to buy your books.